Hi, everybody. This is volume 2 of What is Upper Midwestern Old Time Music? In the last installment, I primarily talked about the historical and cultural background of our music in this region. And today, I want to focus more on the music itself. What does it sound like? What kind of tunes are we playing a lot of? And also a bit of how do I go about this playing it as a musician, especially as a fiddler, which I am. Although this will be hopefully useful for all kinds of instrumentalists. I will say that not everyone will necessarily agree with everything I have to say, and that's perfectly fine. Unless they're a Bears fan, then we have words. Just kidding. I love my Chicago folks too. But yeah, so let's start with just going back to the idea that we've got immigrants coming from all over Europe and also intermixing with many Native American groups, African Americans, some who are newly come up from the South through the Mississippi, or a lot of different ways people were making their way into this region. So if you've got all these different people, then you've got a lot of different potential types of dance tunes, styles of playing, and it could be sort of a proverbial Tower of Babel situation. However, what people found out is that they shared a lot more than you might think, especially in the forms of certain dance tunes that were sort of European and American ballroom standards. I'm thinking specifically of the polka, the waltz, and the schottische. And, of course, people were dancing lots of other things, but generally, like, if you've got a party and, let's say you're a Polish musician, not unlike myself, and you've got a room full of Scandinavians or Czechs or whomever, well, they might not know how to dance to your favorite Kujawiaks and Oberiks, but they probably know how to do the polka or the waltz. And in fact, many of you probably know how to do the polka, right? Those of us who grew up in the upper Midwest, many of us learned at fish fries or church functions, maybe from our moms. It's kind of polkas in the blood a bit, at least here in Wisconsin. And so what I want you to do, I'm going to play you a polka, and I want you to just in your head try and think of how the steps go. Maybe even just like do the steps, like just sitting in your chair, just move your feet a little bit. And I'm going to start with a polka called Alfred Blagan's Hop Waltz. And you might be thinking, I thought you said polka. What's a hop waltz? Well, the dance polka and the music for the polka actually turned up in Norway before the word polka to describe it. So different parts of Norway have different other ways to describe it. And so for many Norwegian American immigrants, they just called it hop waltz. And it wasn't until later, with sort of the advent of the commercialized polka bands, like, you know, the ones coming out of New Ulm, like Six Fat Dutchmen, or Whoopi John Vilfart, or, you know, somebody like Frankie Yankovic, where you have that more standardization. And so a lot of people would have still called them hop waltzes and things like that, depending on their background. So I'll play you this tune I got from Beth Rotto and the Footnotes, or a fantastic band from Decorah, Iowa. It's a wonderful tune, Alfred Blagan's Hop Waltz. So try to polka with me here. Okay, so there's one of our polkas. Again, you know, it's a pretty standard dance for a lot of different ethnicities. Same with the waltz, and I'm going to I'm not doing this to blow my own horn, but it's just the tune that's currently in my head. I'm going to play a waltz that I had written a few years ago, in honor of Bruce Bollerud, who had recently passed. And Bruce was a huge figure in upper Midwestern old time music, longtime part of the Madison area old time group, the Goose Island Ramblers. And I unfortunately never got to meet Bruce, but through a bunch of things he did, including putting out a great book called Accordion Ufta. There's also a mandolin version, Mandolin Ufta. That was, you know, that's where I found some of my first upper Midwestern tunes. So his contribution to local music meant a lot to me. So I wrote this waltz called Waltz for Bruce creatively. So here's a waltz. I think it'll be very familiar to you. That 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, so we've got in our polka, our waltz. Let me take a drink for a moment. Now let's talk about schottisch. So a schottisch is a tune generally written in 4/4 time, but it's got a dotted rhythm. If any of you are familiar with Irish music, it reminds me. It's got a dotted rhythm, a little like an Irish hornpipe, but not quite. So don't like pursue that analogy too far, but it's a little like that. And I will admit this is at least the third time I'm making this video, and I keep getting like 10 minutes in and then like completely messing up the schottisch I was gonna play. So hopefully this is the charm. I'm gonna play one called Gamla Ole Mattis, which is Norwegian for Old Ole Mattis. It's a tune from the great Swiss musician, old-time fiddler extraordinaire Otto Rindlisbacher from Rice Lake, Wisconsin, up in the northwest part of the state. Here we go. Gamla Ole Mattis. Hey, there we go. We got through the schottisch. These three tune types have been kind of from a certain strain or set of strains of upper Midwestern music. But there's more to that. Some of you might be thinking of like, well, what about like more Anglo-American stuff? And you definitely have lots of standards like Soldier's Joy, Money Musk, all manner of things like that. And reels are, so if I were to say that the top tune types, I would say polka, waltz, schottisch, and reel. And that is a little, not entirely a satisfactory conclusion to all that. But here's, for example, here is Soldier's Joy as played in, I think, 1940 by Lysine Brusso. Was born in Canada and moved to Rhinelander, Wisconsin. So it's some of you will notice the tune. It's maybe a little bit of a notier version than you're expecting. But here's Lysine Brusso's Soldier's Joy. Another great, more or less real, one of my absolute favorite tunes is this tune called the Couturier Jig. Allow me to explain. So, I've mentioned Otto Rindlisbacher, at least briefly. He was a fantastic fiddle maker. He ran a tavern in Rice Lake called the Buckhorn, which was a meeting place for musicians. And I believe he learned this this lumber camp tune from the Ojibwe fiddler Regis Belial, who was supposed to be quite the musician in his own right. Couturier is the anglicization of La Couturier, the lake of the short ears, which is a French name, but it's one of our native communities here in Wisconsin, the La Couturier Ojibwe Nation, and I feel privileged to have this tune from them. So like, why is this a jig? Well, it's not a jig in the Irish sense of a 6/8 tune, like not like that. It's a jig in the French Canadian, Native American, and Métis sense of a tune for jigging or step dancing. So here is the Couturier Jig. So that's, at least in my opinion, it's a cracker of a tune. I also had some tunes in 6/8. So a lot of reels and 6/8 tunes were also for square dancing. Square dancing was definitely a thing, as well as the couple and circle dances, like waltzes. And in the lumber camps, you would have dances where it's all dudes. They would decide who would dance the male part, or versus the female part, and tie a bandana around their arms so they know who was who. So here's I'll try to play them just like once through to save time, but here's a couple of lumberjack square dance tunes I like playing together. First one is called the Wickware Square Dance. It's from Barron County, Wisconsin again. And the second one is just called Lumberjack Dance Tune. It's another one I got from a recording of Otto Rindlisbacher. but that's a lot to put in just a little space. But as you can see, I mean, there are a lot of things you can do with this. But a lot of those are sort of our main tune types around here. Also, things like song errors, people would also play. So let's shift to a part 2 of this, where it's, where I talk about like how I as a musician would approach this. First thing, absolute most important thing, is listening. Like, you cannot listen to this too much. And I'm probably preaching to the choir with a lot of you who have been fiddling in one way or another for a long time. But one of the problems with people coming out of classical music instruction, and I started as a classical musician on the viola, is that we just, the focus is on read the music and reproduce what's there. Whereas a lot of vernacular music types, what we might call fiddling, expect a certain degree of improvisation and variation while you play, and you don't necessarily want to play the same thing the same way all the time. And if I'm approaching this, my goal is not to find a transcription and then just play that. Like, in fact, I would advise you against relying on transcriptions too much. And I have to admit that when I'm learning tunes, I definitely look at transcriptions. But I'm doing that after having played the genres that I'm learning those tunes from for decades. So like, what I see and what I know to do from, say, an old book of Irish tunes or something, just your average new player just wouldn't know all of that other information. And that's not anything against anyone who's learning. It's just a reminder that there's a lot of musical elements and style and nuance that just doesn't get that can't be represented on the page, even if we tried really hard. And I've taken a class on that in grad school, and trust me, it's really hard to try and come up with a notation system that gets all the details you want. So the thing that I would do is to do a lot of listening. The Mills Music Library at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has an amazing collection online. You can listen to all kinds of stuff. There's a great radio series some time back called Down Home Dairyland. There's all kinds of stuff floating around. You can find lots of albums, some books here and there. My YouTube channel was originally intended just to have sort of an online database for people to learn from for some of these tunes. So the listening part is hugely important, but let's say I'm listening, and then like, how do I make sense of what I'm listening? Because unless like you're really skilled at playing and listening and understanding what exactly it is you're hearing, you might be like, okay, well, what I get the notes, but what are they doing with the bow? Like, what kind of bowing am I supposed to use? Well, if you're a fiddler, the bowing is pretty much whatever you want it to be. I think it was a quote by Otto Rindlisbacher where somebody asked him, like, how do you like what do you do as a fiddler? And he said something along. I think this was Otto. Said something along the lines of, every fiddler gets the tune, and then they do their own thing with it. I will say that the bowing style for upper Midwestern fiddling tends to be a lot of just single bows. Some people might call that saw stroke. I don't really like the term because you don't want to sound like you're sawing. But like going back to Lazine Brousseau's Soldier's Joy real slowly. So I had like 2 notes that were slurred in there. Now that's not to say that people didn't, use slurs and stuff, but I would recommend sort of start with mostly separate bows as your go-to, and then like really be listening to the sound that you want, and use bowings that give you that sound. I have plenty of times where I'm playing and I might throw in, I don't know, I might like slurp 3 or 4 notes together or something. And the only reason I have for that, I didn't get it out of some magical old source known only to old codgers and curmudgeons. It just sounded right. And the more you play, the more you learn that kind of thing. So there's a lot of freedom, and I would really encourage you to let the sound guide you. One of the things that's real interesting, and this is a little bit controversial. So I want to, so please bear with me, because I don't want to knock anyone else's approach to things. Besides, I just want to say how I do it. So we have kind of an interesting situation where, like, given how much influence on upper Midwestern fiddling comes from Scandinavia, and the widespread use of alternate tunings on Scandinavian fiddles, both the regular fiddle and an instrument called the hardanger fiddle with sympathetic strings. It's kind of surprising that none of that really kept going in the US, with the exception of specifically hardanger fiddle playing. And the reason that I think that happened is one, like, a lot of that, the repertoire that would require that was very, very localized, and I think kind of tended to get sort of ironed out in favor of more widely accessible types of music. But I think in terms of practical terms, like when you retune your strings, like instead of G, D, A, E, let's say I tune to ADAE. Like, it sounds really cool. And there's all kinds of different retunings that you can do. And those can sound great. But the problem is that when you retune a lot, you essentially limit the number of keys that are going to sound good in that tuning. Some keys are going to sound amazing, but some other ones just won't work very well. And so, like, some Southern old time musicians will like go to jams with two fiddles, each in a different tuning, and so that's, yeah. I mean, we don't really have a tradition of that I'm aware of. Again, outside of like specifically hardung or fiddle playing in the Upper Midwest. But there are people that do that, and it can sound really cool. I think why it was sort of abandoned largely is that if you're in standard tuning, it's just easier to go from one key to another. Whereas like on some like Southern old time jams, you know, you might be playing tunes on A for like 40 minutes or something, and then everyone switches to their D fiddle, and you know, if you are into Southern old time music, and I am oversimplifying, I apologize. Don't hurt me. But I think that, yeah, so it just there's a wide range of keys, and you know, so part of the idea of bringing in alternate tunings and stuff is to try to like bring back the sense of droniness of the music, and that's a totally legit approach. However, I see the droniness, and like let's say that I do like an alternate tuning. The kind of droniness that I get is going to be a little bit different than I might find elsewhere. Like, let's say I'm doing, got that versus where I've got the melody below the drone. In that lumberjack dance tune where I go, or so I am droning, and I'm using a lot of double stops, and the way that I'm doing that to me, and Otto Rindlisbacher does some of this on that as well. On the recording I learned it from, is really an imitation of like what you would do on the hardanger fiddle. And I may be rambling and going kind of over some heads right now, but do know that people are trying to give that drony feeling that a lot of fiddle music had, including Upper Midwestern stuff, and trying to do it in a bunch of different ways. And I think the thing to know is that like no one way is like the way to do it, or the authentic way. Like, we're all, you know, doing what Otto Rindlisbacher said. You know, we get a hold of the tune and then we make it our own. And so be generous, be inquisitive, and try different things out with the tunes. So let me think. Is that all? Yes, I mentioned mostly single bows. I would also sort of try to stay kind of in the middle of the bow, about maybe 40% from the frog to the middle. Um, I find that probably gives the best results. If you have more fiddly questions, drop them in the comments. I'm going to go now because I think I've been talking your ear off for a bit too long. But yeah, go out there and enjoy this stuff, consult multiple sources, and have a frickin' blast. Thanks.